Welcome to the Geek Cabal channel. I'm Bob,
I'm Jim.
and you're about to watch a clip from one of our longer podcast videos since they've been running about an hour and a half, 2 hours. We splice clips out. If you like the whole thing, it'll be linked to in the description. Hopefully, you'll watch it too. It's up to you, though. And since this is YouTube, you know how it goes. If you like what you like here, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But otherwise, hope you enjoy the clip. Which brings us to gaming, where
Yes,
Jim has some stuff to talk about.
yes. So obviously, being as everyone knows, we keep saying the spooky month. That's just, I guess, the internet trend to call it because October is the spooky month. You know, you got to put all the skeletons and all that stuff out. But one of the things I wanted to do was just kind of vintage horror gaming. So it's hard to imagine that there were horror games actually back in the day, but because obviously the graphics didn't really support those kinds of things. And hell, I've got a list here, and I probably could think of even more now that I think about it, because I didn't even think about the Turbo Graphics, which had Splatterhouse, the very quintessential horror game, because you're pretty much like Jason Voorhees, and you can smash people with a baseball bat and other sorts of weapons and stuff. You're possessed by a mask, and you're trying to save your girlfriend from like all sorts of horror things. But
So kind of like The Mask.
yes, well, but it's more like,
But Eric Roberts instead of, well, I guess he has a kind of a horror thing.
well, it's more of a, if Jason Voorhees was possessed by his mask, that's what it looks like. But I just marked that one down, so so if you happen to have a TurboGrafx, actually I think there is a TurboGrafx Mini, and I believe it does come with Splatterhouse on it. Um, but just a couple of consoles that if you wanted to see some horror games for, start off with the 2600, because who the hell would think that the Atari 2600 could have horror games? Obviously, the quintessential one is Haunted House. But speaking of Halloween, there is a Halloween one on there as well, where you play as Jamie Lee Curtis's character trying to save the children,
Okay.
and you have to save the children. And it's just a point-based game. There's not a way of winning it, but you just get points for every children you save. You don't lose points when the children get murdered by Michael Myers, but
Man, Michael Myers didn't kill any kids in the movie.
well, he
Like,
does. He does in the game.
well, in sorry for minor divergence here. In the more recent Halloween movies that follow up the first movie, the first of which the new one is just called Halloween, there he kills like a 10, 12-year-old kid, but in the others he didn't.
I just like the fact in Alien vs Predator Requiem
Requiem, yeah.
that I mean, you get to see a face hugger on a child.
Yeah, and then the chest burster.
Oh yeah, but oh yeah, and there's another one for the Atari 2600, because not only do they have Halloween, but they also have Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They're very rare games, so the only way you're probably going to play them is through emulation, but they're out there. Going into the 8-bit range. Now, some of these I'm going to kind of just explain why I have them on the list, because they may not seem, uh, and some of them may be in multiple consoles too. The very first one I have is Metroid. Now, Metroid on its own isn't scary, but it's the atmosphere. You're going in to a strange planet. There is just alien creatures everywhere. Everything's trying to kill you in some sort, and it's just maze-like, and there's just no story behind it. It doesn't give you, in the year XXX or whatever. There's no story. You just jump into it, and you just know what you're supposed to be doing, kind of thing.
So, no year 20XX, Dr. Wily has launched his robot rebellion,
Nope.
and it's up to you to stop him.
Nope. Nope. And then there's a few that are obviously, inspired by horror movies, or more classic horror movies like Castlevania. You've got your Dracula, Frankenstein, which is like the reverse of Castlevania, where you are fighting Frankenstein versus Dracula, but Dracula's one of the mini bosses, or not mini bosses, like the bosses before.
Yeah.
Well, then Frankenstein also turns into a giant, like takes up the whole screen somehow. I have no idea how, but that's what happens. Um, and on one of my previous Tales and Collecting video, or the first Tales and Collecting video I did, um, I mentioned, I mentioned one game, but there's another one I did not mention I would like to get, and it's a Japanese only game, but they do make translation files for it called Sweet Home. Now, Sweet Home was specifically, they say it was the predecessor, because it's Capcom, the predecessor to Resident Evil. Uh, Very cool, 8-bit. going in through a mansion kind of thing, solving puzzles, that kind of stuff. Uh, definitely one of those translation games I want to get. Um, and on top of that, and I'm going to mention the other one that I had in the Tales of Collecting video when I get to the Super Nintendo. But to finish up the regular Nintendo, and again, this isn't in a comprehensive list. This is just some ideas if you want games. Obviously, Ghosts and Goblins, just because they're Ghosts and Goblins.
Sure.
And then speaking of aliens, believe it or not, Alien 3 for the NES is actually a pretty decent game because there's not one alien. There's tons of aliens, but it's a premise of being on a prison planet, having to free the people because I guess they get kidnapped by the aliens, and you go and you save them before they get you know turned into breeding stock for
Yeah.
the aliens. So Alien 3. And Alien 3 is also on Super Nintendo as well, which I'm getting ready to go into. So for Super Nintendo, and I did this on my Tales of Collecting, Clock Tower. Again, another Japanese game that you can get translated into English. Very good. Great music. The villain, while fairly underwhelming, it just looks like a man child carrying giant shears that stabs people with them. And I do mean a man child. Like he's obviously an adult, but he's the size of a child wearing like the schoolboy kind of
Yeah.
outfit kind of thing. A little weird, but yeah. So Clock Tower, like I said, you can buy it on eBay. Usually, I got mine for $20 on eBay, and it's fully translated, plays on the Super Nintendo just fine. And again, I had Metroid on the NES. Super Metroid's another good one. Music, atmosphere, just turned to 11 on it. Again, nothing inherently scary about it, but it's just the atmosphere, the music, the sound. That very first opening scene, going to the space station and seeing all the scientists, killed. Um, Very good. And another also, I'm going to mention this I mentioned it in the Nintendo. It's in the Super Nintendo, and there's also a version on the Sega Genesis, and that is for the Super Nintendo, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. For the Sega Genesis, it's Super Ghosts and Goblins. All different games. So if you have a Super Nintendo, you have a Sega Genesis. I do recommend both of them. I do not have it on the Sega Genesis though. I
Hmm.
do have it on the Super Nintendo. Another one that is on both the Sega and the Super Nintendo is Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Again, it's just zombies, and it's a cornier game. It's not scary by any means, but it's a fun two-player game where you use squirt guns to shoot zombies. And there's other things. There's like these like little babies with knives, obviously like inspired by Chucky.
Yeah.
Different things like that, kind of unique. Um, and there is I have to look it up. There's a one for the Sega Genesis I was just thinking of where you play a poltergeist possessing people, trying to scare them, or possess items in their home to try to scare them out of the home.
Hmm.
I have to look that one up. But the one that Bobby mentioned for the Sega Genesis is, or Sega CD, I should say, is Night Trap. Night Trap is I don't know, like a B movie horror game kind of thing. It's not scary by any means, but
No.
it's very campy, very whatever. A fun one, again, one of those games that you could play with, like, I would say you could play with the kids, even though it's funny to think about it. That back in the day, that was one of the two games that caused the ESRB rating to be put into place. And it is so stupid that was something that was causing the scare or whatever. So, but like I said, there's a few of them in there that, like I said, they have the ability to not really scare, but to unsettle in some things. Like I said, Super Metroid, the music, Clock Tower, the story is kind of creepy. There's jump scares in it. I mean, they do them very well. Now, if you want to get into something that that's early horror that actually has those scary elements, the ones that the one I definitely remember me personally playing was the first Resident Evil. Now, dialogue, yes, is very corny.
Oh, Jill, you master of lock picking?
No, you were almost a Jill sandwich. But no, the cinematic views, that very first zombie that you see used to scare the shit out of me. And you look at it now and you're like, well, this looks terrible. But I can tell you right now, on Steam and everything, there's a renaissance of PS1 styled horror games.
Well, also, if you want the first Resident Evil, but like better, there is the It's not a remake, but it's not an upgrade. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, so because they did the one on the
I'm trying to think what the title of it is.
well, they did the okay, so they did the one on the GameCube.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
And you don't really lose a whole lot on it because they pretty much keep everything intact. It's just better visuals. It's
Well,
a
they add more to the plot.
what would they? Yeah, I'm trying to think because it's not a
It's a remaster. Is what I'm trying to
remaster.
think. Yeah,
Yes,
but it's not a straight remaster. They actually I want to say they added like another third of the game to it.
that and Resident Evil Zero was also pretty good.
Yeah.
That you figure out how Rebecca Chambers gets into the mansion.
Yeah, zero and one are like right around the same time, similar to how two and three are. Because two literally takes place in the middle of part three.
Yeah.
Because there's a point in time where your character's unconscious, and that's like where two takes place. And then you wake up right afterwards.
Yep. And so these are all for the PlayStation One. So the ones that I mentioned right now. So at Resident Evil, you have 1, 2, and 3. Um,
I think Code Veronica is the first one for the PlayStation Two, isn't it?
it was originally for the Dreamcast, but then they made a PlayStation 2 version of it. Silent Hill, again, great on the PS1. And the one thing about Silent Hill is the fog was a limitation for the PS1. They couldn't do the draw distance like they wanted to, so they put fog everywhere. And so the one thing that makes Silent Hill almost makes you shit your pants half the time when you know, it's all just because of hardware limitations.
For those of you who've never seen it, you should check out the movie also. It's literally dripping with scenery.
Yeah. And then this one, so those are pretty common. Everyone knows about those two. And the last one I mentioned here, this is one, again, the one guy I work with from Canada had always mentioned about, was Parasite Eve. Now, Parasite Eve is very, very reminiscent of Resident Evil. It's, again, a parasite, I believe, instead of virus. But, and I know that Resident Evil 4 was a parasite, not a virus. But Parasite Eve did it first. And Parasite Eve was, I think, one of the first games that I had, and I don't have it now, but that I had, it was a 2-disc. But yeah, and I would go further into like GameCube and stuff like that. I know we mentioned a couple, but this is more because I'm into the retro stuff, and for people that want to have that vintage experience and just wanted some ideas on there, definitely check out the list. It's, and like I said, I didn't mention everything. These were all some of them off the top of my head. Yes, I had to look some of them up because I couldn't remember the name of them. Sweet Home being the one because it's Japanese only, and I do not own it. Probably very shortly after this we're done filming, I may go and own it. Because again, great thing about those types of games is because they're essentially ROM hacks because they're taking the Japanese version, translating them. They're usually not expensive. The problem is for some of them is that if they use legitimate boards, is that they're sacrificing other games to make the boards. So they'll take like a copy of Super Mario and wipe the ROM and put it on there instead. So
yeah.
But the ones that I seem to buy are completely like new boards because they do make new boards that you can buy, and then they just buy like cheap cases and put labels on them. So I don't feel too bad about that because if it never came out in the U.S., it's just another way you can actually own these games or actually play them and play them on legitimate hardware.
Yeah. So probably does it for gaming.
Yeah.
All right. So on to streaming.